She stood in the corner of the room, her eyes following the lunch lady as she leaned closer to the boy before serving him his food. For a split second, the pair shared a knowing look before the woman grinned. The boys were a light pink. He was blushing as he extended his hand for the special meal. There was a rumor going around that something sinister was going on in the cafeteria. When the teacher saw it for herself, she knew she had to get to the bottom of it. Her findings would have her calling the police. Cassie Johnson did not expect to be calling the authorities that day, begging them to rush to the school. In addition to being a dedicated and compassionate teacher, she had always taken pride in creating an environment that was supportive and nurturing for her students. The day she realized that one of her students was in trouble, she knew she had to step in. She was overjoyed to see her loving and energetic third-grade students step into class every morning. Their bright smiles always made her happy. She greeted every single one of them, mirroring their big smiles. One of Cassie's brightest and happiest students was Clive Anderson, and since day one, he had impressed her with his academic prowess. She had no idea what was about to happen to him. It was clear that Clive was a gifted boy. A bright, generous, and eager student, he always participated in class activities. No matter where he went, he walked around with a smile on his face. Often mentioning his achievements to her fellow teachers, Cassie admired his dedication and hard work in the classroom. As the semester progressed, however, things began to go downhill. It all began with a change in his behavior. Clive wasn't as chirpy as usual, and Cassie noticed. Sulking, he appeared lost in thought. After asking him if he was okay, he just stared blankly at her before turning away. Cassie was concerned about this change in behavior. In the 3 years she had taught Clive, she had never seen him like this before. It was up to her to get to the bottom of the problem. Throughout the week, Cassie watched Clive closely. Previously, he was the life of the classroom, eliciting answers from other kids and playing along with whatever game Cassie was using to teach. But now he was distant and sad. The usual gleam in his eyes had now been replaced by sadness, and his laughter had disappeared. There was something terribly wrong. Cassie couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. She carried a heavy burden of concern in her heart. She wouldn't be able to forgive herself if she failed to figure out what was bothering Clive. The more she studied him, the more interested she became. It made her wonder if something within the school was causing his issue. Did the older students bully him? The answer would be far worse. Cassie arranged to see Clive after school one Monday afternoon after the last bell rang. "Clive, can I have a word after class?" she spoke gently, smiling at the young boy. She led him to a quiet corner after he nodded and approached her desk. "Yes, Ms. Johnson," Clive spoke hesitantly. With glossy eyes, he glanced at Cassie before looking down. "I have noticed you haven't been yourself of late," Cassie said gently while crouching down on one knee. "It worries me to see you this way. Is everything okay?" Clive stared at her for a moment, his eyes boring into hers. It seemed he was assessing the authenticity of her words. His answer would lead Cassie to the truth. "I am," he responded, keeping eye contact with his teacher. Cassie could tell, however, that he was hiding something. His eyes were drawn to the window outside, where other kids were boarding the bus. It appeared he had picked up something good outside because he smiled, though slightly, and asked Cassie if he could leave. "Of course," she said, but she knew that this was far from over. Cassie had been taken aback by Clive's reaction. This was the first time she'd seen him lie. She hadn't seen this side of him before. She watched him run out of the school building into the afternoon sun from the class window. Something piqued her interest just as she was about to turn around. But what did she see? Most students loved it when their school bus arrived at the gate, ready to pick them up. Clive was no different. It was usually he who was the first to rush to it, laughing loudly. However, he did not run toward the bus as he usually does. After taking a left turn, he went to the side of the school, where he disappeared for a moment. Upon returning into view, he held a brown paper bag. It was hard for Cassie to comprehend what was happening. What caused Clive's behavior to change so suddenly before he left? Where did he get the brown paper bag, and why didn't he go straight to the bus? However, the most important question was what was inside the bag he held so happily. Cassie was desperate to get some answers. This is the first time Cassie had seen Clive in a good mood after worrying about him for 2 weeks. With his trademark smile, he hopped onto the bus and headed home from school. Observing in silence, Cassie was bamboozled. While the driver was pulling out of the parking lot, Clive started waving at someone out of nowhere. Cassie frowned. Who was the boy interacting with? In an attempt to see who Clive was waving at, Cassie stuck her head out of the window. But she was surprised to find that the parking lot was empty. In an effort to comprehend what she had just seen, she stood at the window for a few minutes. She quickly realized that she needed to track down Clive's mystery friend if she was going to crack this case. But where would she even begin? Throughout the week, Cassie shadowed Clive, trying to identify his friend. Again, he sulked in class, and at recess he sat alone. One day she almost lost hope when she heard some of the kids talk about Clive. They implied that something terrible was going on between him and a faculty member. Upon hearing these rumors, Cassie was speechless. The truth was yet to be revealed to her. Cassie kept a close eye on Clive. Her curiosity led her to move around a few classes, hoping to watch him during lunch and recess. It wasn't until one of these breaks that she saw what was happening with her own 2 eyes. The kids didn't lie after all. Cassie couldn't believe this. Cassie watched Clive discreetly during lunch break with a racing heart. A picnic table near the playground edge was empty as he sat alone at a picnic table, seemingly lost in thought. The lunch lady's familiar face approached him, widening her eyes. The hushed conversation caught Cassie's ear as her heart pounded. It was hard for her to believe what she was hearing. Clive was not only being spoken to by the lunch lady, but she was also giving him money. There was no escaping the fact that something underhanded was taking place under everyone's noses. Almost like an open secret, the other children looked at her. There was nothing Cassie could do at the moment. A confrontation in front of everyone wasn't something she wanted to do. They would be embarrassed if she did that. Still, she needed to figure out what was going on. The children seemed to be aware of something that was going on. In no uncertain terms, Clive was receiving something from the lunch lady. However, it might not have been what she thought. Suppose the lunch lady did something illegal and her job was in jeopardy. After the lunch break, Cassie searched the classroom for Clive, but he hadn't yet arrived. She thought he might have gone to the bathroom first. In order to prevent the kids from waiting, she began her lesson without him. However, she was no longer able to focus and had to ask the other kids for help. Have any of you seen Clive? It didn't occur to any of the children that Clive wasn't in class until they began to look around. After that, they began whispering to each other. Observing them, Cassie noticed that some might know where Clive was. "Timothy, do you know where Clive is?" she asked. Cassie approached Timothy when he arose from his chair. "I saw him go to the cafeteria, Ms. Johnson," was all Timothy said. Cassie could only sigh. It seemed like something was amiss. There has been some talk in the school cafeteria over the past week about something that was happening there. It wasn't the best kind of rumor, and Cassie hoped they weren't true. She felt compelled to follow Clive during lunchtime. She had no idea what had gotten into her, but she couldn't let it go. Eventually, she gave in to the urge, ushering Clive and a few other kids into the cafeteria. She pretended to walk away when the kids joined the food queue, but she hurried behind a corner and bided her time, waiting to see if there was any truth to what the kids were saying. Clive walked up to the lunch lady. He had already picked a tray for his food, but he didn't hand it over, instead holding it against his chest with both arms. Cassie didn't know what to expect, but what the lunch lady was about to do was despicable. Cassie started second-guessing her decision to stand idly by once again, but what else could she do? She had no evidence against anyone, and all they were right now were rumors. She considered going to the principal, but she knew how that would end. An investigation would be launched, but it meant that the lunch day would be tipped off to the attention, and she'd never get caught. This was Cassie's only way of making sure Clive would be okay, but she couldn't help but feel like whatever was going on, it wasn't all right. She wanted to believe that the rumors weren't true. But now that it was Clive's turn at the front of the queue, Cassie was about to see if there was any truth to the rumors. She was watching with bated breath. But no one was ready for the truth. Cassie could not quite hear what the lunch lady was saying when she started talking to Clive since she was feet away from the serving line. But she could see her wink and grin before gesturing for his tray to be handed over. Despite his reluctance, Clive handed it over. But just then, the lady did something that made Cassie's brows furrow. Cassie felt her stomach churn as she thought about all of the rumors and what was going on. She had a bad feeling about everything as the lunch lady gave her student a sinister grin. She was about to give something to him. Cassie felt dread creep up her spine as the lunch lady extended a hand to the boy. But it wasn't empty. She was about to give him something that wasn't on the menu. Cassie watched as she handed him a bag. It was the same brown paper bag Clive had run into the bus with the other day. Was she his mystery friend? Did he run to her instead of getting on the bus? There were a lot of questions racing through Cassie's head, but she wasn't able to leave her hiding spot. Not yet. Her gaze remained fixed on him, knowing there was more going on than was apparent. Cassie strained her eyes as she tried to make sense of what was happening. In her brown paper bag, the lunch lady discreetly placed something into Clive's tray as he handed it over. Clive had received a brown paper bag from the lunch lady before, and Cassie realized it was the same bag. The boy had seemed depressed for weeks, but now he was chipper than ever, and she knew it all had to do with whatever the lunch lady was giving him that wasn't normally on the menu. Did it all explain his new behavior? Cassie knew she was close to finding out the truth. It just took a little bit more restraint on her part to crack the case wide open. And the possibilities raced through her mind. Could there be something in that bag? How could Clive be receiving something from the lunch lady so secretively? Clive walked away from the lunch lady with his bag, seemingly unaware of the seriousness of the situation. She gave him a warm smile and pat on the shoulder before he left. Seeing this exchange out in the open, Cassie was shocked. Now that she had proof of the exchange, she had to act quickly before anything more drastic happened. If she ever let something happen to one of her students, she'd never forgive herself. She quickly planned her next move. She needed to get to Clive before the evidence was gone, and she was no more than a crazy person. But she couldn't be too obvious either. Instinctively, Cassie reacted. It was imperative that she confronted Clive about this. In the afternoon, after everyone had returned from lunch, Cassie would ask Clive to stay after class. She needed to tread carefully in order to avoid scaring him away or making him feel cornered. Was she making the right decision? Cassie sat with the young boy and looked him in the eyes. That's when it occurred to her. Had she done the right thing? She felt doubt start sowing into her mind as she started talking to the boy. She thought about how the boy had suddenly been happy, and it was because of the lunch lady. What if things were innocent and the rumors weren't true? It took Cassie a moment to figure out exactly what she wanted to say to the troubled boy. She couldn't make him feel like he was in trouble, even if she knew the evidence was in his possession. She didn't want him to run away. She decided to try and be subtle. She started by asking him if everything was okay, but she wouldn't be ready for the answer. All the small boy had to say was that he didn't want to talk about it. But he did have a strange insight she didn't expect. "I'm a lot happier now. I know I was a little sad, but not anymore," he told Cassie, who was bamboozled. Then she started thinking about everything that had happened up until that moment. She started thinking about what the boy had to say. Had she misread the situation? She noticed that he appeared happy and content when she looked at him again. Nothing sinister seemed to be happening. Her thoughts turned to what Clive would do if there were a problem. This point left Cassie feeling conflicted. The lunch lady's secret exchanges with Clive intrigued her, but she didn't want to interfere too much. She observed him for a few more minutes. Was she reading too much into this? Or should she trust her instincts and intervene? Cassie couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in her gut. She had always prided herself on being there for her students, and Clive was no exception. Even if he seemed content now, she couldn't dismiss the fact that his behavior had drastically changed recently. At the farthest end of the cafeteria, Clive ate from his food tray and the mysterious paper bag. There was something strange about him sitting alone, Cassie thought. Whenever Clive ate, a line of kids gathered around him. It made Cassie feel sad to see him alone. Before she could approach the boy, the lunch lady beat her to it. All she could do now was stare. The lunch lady made her way over to Clive and sat next to him for a few minutes. In Cassie's mind, she wondered whether they were related in some way. However, she had met Clive's parents before and knew they weren't related. Cassie wanted to give the lady the benefit of the doubt. After all, she didn't know anything about the situation. But she would face the law very soon if what the kids said about her was true. She wished that she could have just trusted the faculty. But the biggest issue was the rumors that she had heard. Sure, they could have just been schoolyard stories, but if they weren't, Clive was in danger. She couldn't let the child fall into mishap. She would try her best to make sure she upholded her responsibility as a teacher. But then she noticed something about the boy. Although Clive was clearly less miserable than usual, he seemed uncomfortable with the lady. As he finished his tray and stuffed the brown paper bag into his backpack, he exchanged words with the lunch lady. After that, he waved goodbye and walked away. It was Cassie's turn to walk away, too. She knew there was something going on. The contents of the brown paper bag would give the answers she needed. Cassie had made up her mind. She needed to find out what was in that bag, for better or for worse. If it was nothing to worry about, then she would be relieved. But she couldn't risk the rumors being true. It was a delicate situation and she needed to approach it delicately. One misstep meant she would never know the truth behind what was in the paper bag. Clive walked quietly back to class and Cassie followed him. She had already devised an elaborate plan to ensure that his backpack would be searched. She had a responsibility as his teacher to ensure he was kept safe from harm. Having the power to help him, she couldn't let him flounder. She kept telling herself that she was doing the right thing. Cassie waited until all kids were settled in class before informing them they would spend the rest of their period playing on the field. All but Clive jumped joyfully, and the teacher ushered them out of class. Assuring them she was right behind them, she requested they go to the field. Once the class was empty, she hurried to Clive's backpack. She had to act fast. She knew that what she was doing was wrong. She didn't have a right to do this, but she had no choice now. If she didn't take matters into her own hands, then something serious could happen. She made sure no one else was looking when she found Clive's backpack. The moment of truth was seconds away. What was she about to find out about the lunch lady and the young student? Cassie opened the backpack and reached for the brown paper bag. She only had a little time since leaving students on the playing field during class wasn't ideal. The kids were ecstatic to be having an extra recess, but she was taking a huge risk doing it. No teachers were allowed to do things like this. But now she had the bag in her hands, it was too late to go back. She'd get in trouble if the principal found the kids all alone. But she felt the risk necessary if it meant helping one of her star students. She opened the bag, stepping back at what she saw. She couldn't believe what the boy had been given by the lunch lady. They definitely weren't what was on the normal menu. She had given him a special treat, and it was definitely why he was happier. Filling the brown paper bag was an assortment of foil-wrapped delicacies, from pizza slices and cheese sandwiches to vegetables and fruits. Cassie wrapped them back up and returned everything the way she found it. She didn't know how to process what she had just found. She had to plan her next move, but things would escalate quickly. She went to teach her class even more confused than before. Fear bubbled through her as the implication of the food in Clive's backpack meant she only half-focused on teaching the kids for the rest of the day. She was coming up with a plan to make sure the kid was okay. That's when she came to a conclusion she needed to call the authorities. Cassie had always heard stories of faculty members getting involved with students in ways they shouldn't. She prayed that wasn't the case here. But she couldn't live on assumptions and guesswork. She hurried to the lunch lady as soon as her class was over. She had to go straight to the source of everything that was happening. The lunch lady, Mrs. Townsend, had worked in the school well before Cassie joined 3 years ago. Cassie didn't beat around the bush. She asked what was going on between the lunch lady and Clive. Cassie stared straight into the soul of the lunch lady. It was clear that she was going to get the truth out of her, one way or another. But what about the authorities? The lunch lady explained that for 2 months, Clive had been sitting alone during lunch because he didn't have enough money in his account for food. His parents were going through a rough patch and had separated and seemingly neglected him and his little sister. She had managed to deduce this and felt bad for him. She needed to help him one way or another. The authorities responded quickly to Cassie's call. In a short time, 2 police officers arrived at the school along with a social worker. Her heart heavy with concern, Cassie explained the situation to them. Cassie's admiration for Mrs. Townsend's compassion grew as they spoke to her and gathered information. Throughout Clive and his sister's difficult times, Mrs. Townsend went above and beyond to help them. Clive felt at ease discussing his situation with the social worker, Emily, due to her compassionate demeanor. The purpose of their visit was not to judge or punish Clive, but to help him. She explained to him the assistance programs and services available to his family. As Clive realized that there were people who genuinely cared about his well-being, his guarded expression softened. Through Mrs. Townsend's kindness, their plight had been brought to the attention of others, resulting in the necessary intervention. The social worker, named Emily, had a compassionate demeanor that put Clive at ease when they talked to him. Emily assured Clive that they were there to help, not to judge or punish. She gently explained the resources available to his family, including assistance programs and support services. But Clive didn't want to say much. It was clear he was embarrassed of his situation. Clive's guarded expression gradually softened as he realized that there were people who genuinely cared about his well-being. Mrs. Townsend's act of kindness had brought attention to their plight and led to the intervention they so desperately needed. Now, because of everything that Cassie had done, Clive's life was about to change for the better. The teacher had managed to bring attention to the important issue. Clive's demeanor gradually changed over the next few weeks. His cheerful spirit returned after the weight of hunger and uncertainty was lifted off his shoulders. The student she knew returned to being lively and engaged. Clive's positive changes filled Cassie's heart with pride. Through the unity and empathy displayed by the school community, Clive was able to help his family through a tough time and learn the power of compassion and community. Clive's family began receiving support as the school year progressed. Providing them with food, counseling, and financial aid, they were on their way to recovery. As part of the school's parenting workshops, Clive's parents also received instruction on how to communicate and create a stable home environment. Cassie remained Clive's pillar of support throughout his journey, offering guidance and encouragement along the way. Cassie often confided in Clive about his aspirations and dreams as their relationship grew stronger.